Wait, you're putting that inside me? The black mail-order bride first trembled, but the cowboy? She sat alone on the hard wooden bench inside the small train station, holding a single suitcase in both hands. The building smelled of dust and old paper, and the sound of the wind moving outside felt louder than the quiet voices inside. Her heart beat fast, not from running, but from fear of what waited beyond the door. She had traveled far, leaving behind her home, her family, and the small town where everyone knew her name. Now, she was stepping into a life built from letters and promises. The letters had been kind. They spoke of open land, clear skies, and a man who worked hard and lived honestly. They said he wanted a partner, not just someone to share his roof, but someone to share his days. She had read those words again and again, sometimes late at night, imagining a new start. Still, imagination was softer than reality. Reality was cold air and heavy boots, and a stranger waiting somewhere outside. When the train whistle faded into the distance, she stood up slowly. Her legs felt weak, but she told herself to move. She took one step, then another, and pushed open the door. The wind touched her face, carrying the smell of dry grass and earth. Across the small open space stood a man in a worn hat and a brown coat. He looked taller than she expected, and older too, with lines around his eyes that showed long days under the sun. He removed his hat when he saw her, holding it in both hands. For a moment neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, both unsure what to say first. "You must be her," he finally said, his voice calm but careful. She nodded. "And you must be him." He gave a small smile, not wide or proud, but gentle. "Yes, I'm glad you made it." Those simple words lifted a small weight from her chest. She had worried he might look disappointed, or turn away, or not even be there at all. Instead, he stood in front of her, real and steady. He reached for her suitcase, but paused, waiting for her to agree. She handed it over, grateful for the help. Together, they walked toward a small wagon tied to a tired-looking horse. The road stretched ahead, long and quiet. The ride to the ranch felt longer than the train journey. The land seemed endless, with low hills and open sky in every direction. She watched birds fly across the horizon and tried to imagine living here. No neighbors close by. No busy streets, just land, animals, and the sound of the wind. He spoke from time to time, pointing out places along the way. "That creek runs strong in the spring," he said. "Good water there." Or, "That old fence needs fixing, but it keeps the cattle in." She listened and nodded, unsure how to add to the conversation. Her mind stayed busy with questions she didn't know how to ask. Would she be good enough here? Would she be strong enough for this kind of life? When they reached the ranch, she saw a small wooden house with a slanted roof and a porch that looked out over a wide field. It wasn't grand, but it stood firm against the land, like it belonged there. "This is home," he said. She stepped down from the wagon and walked slowly toward the door. The floor inside creaked under her shoes. The room was simple, with a table, 2 chairs, a stove, and a few shelves. Light came in through a single window, painting soft lines across the floor. "It's quiet," she said. He nodded. "It is. But it's honest." She placed her suitcase near the wall and stood still, unsure of what to do next. The silence felt heavy again, like at the train station. He cleared his throat. "I know this is strange," he said. "For both of us. You didn't have to come all this way." She looked at him. "I did. I needed something new, something that wasn't waiting for me to fail." He seemed to think about that. "I don't expect you to be perfect. I just hope we can try. Those words stayed with her. Try, not promise, not demand, just try. Later, they sat at the table and shared a simple meal: bread, soup, and water. The food was warm, and it filled her more than her stomach. It made the place feel real, like a home that could grow. As the sun began to lower, she stepped outside onto the porch. The sky turned soft colors, and the land glowed gently in the fading light. He joined her, standing a small distance away, giving her space. "I've never seen so much sky," she said. He smiled slightly. "It's one of the best things about this place." They stood there in silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt calmer, less like a wall, more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. That night, as she lay on a small bed in the corner of the room, she stared at the ceiling. Every sound was new. The wind, the creak of the house, the soft movement of the man in the other part of the room, giving her privacy and respect. Fear still lived in her chest, but so did something else, a small, careful hope. She had come as a stranger. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Hard work, mistakes, maybe even regrets. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like her life wasn't standing still. Outside, the land rested under the wide sky. Inside, two people who barely knew each other shared the same space, the same air, and the same uncertain future. Morning came quietly, carried by the soft light that slipped through the small window. She opened her eyes and lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch. Somewhere outside, a bird called out. The wind moved gently across the land, brushing against the walls of the house like a slow breath. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered. The long journey, the man, the wide land that now waited for her every day. She sat up and placed her feet on the wooden floor. It was cold, and she shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. The house was simple, and there was no place to hide from the morning chill. She stood, straightened her clothes, and walked toward the small table. He was already awake. He stood near the stove, stirring something in a small pot. When he saw her, he gave a small nod. "Morning," he said.
"Morning," she replied. The smell of warm food filled the room.
It wasn't fancy, but it felt kind. He placed 2 bowls on the table and sat across from her. They ate in quiet, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt like 2 people learning how to share space. After breakfast, he stood and picked up his coat. "There's work to do outside. You don't have to come if you don't want to. I know this is all new." She thought about staying inside where it was warmer and safer, but she also knew she hadn't come all this way to hide. She stood up. "I'll come. I want to learn." That seemed to surprise him, but in a good way. He gave a small smile. "All right, just stay close." They stepped outside into the fresh air. The sun was low, and the land stretched wide and open. She felt small standing there, but also free. He showed her the animals, moving slowly so she could follow. The cows watched them with calm eyes. The horse lifted its head and stamped the ground. "Most days start like this," he said. "Feed the animals, check the fences, make sure nothing broke in the night." She listened carefully, trying to remember every word. He handed her a small bucket of feed, and she followed him to the animals. At first she felt unsure, but soon she found a rhythm. Pour, step back, wait. The animals moved closer, and she felt a small sense of pride. As the morning went on, the sun rose higher, and the work grew harder. Her arms began to ache. Her hands grew rough from holding tools she had never used before. but she didn't complain. Every task felt like a step toward belonging. At one point, she tripped over a loose stone and almost fell. He reached out and steadied her. "Careful," he said. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a little embarrassed. He didn't laugh. He didn't judge. He just nodded and let go, giving her space again. Later, they walked toward the edge of the land where a fence had fallen. He showed her how to lift the wood and push it back into place. It took both of them working together. When they finished, she looked at the fence, then at him. "We did it," she said, a small smile on her face. "Yes," he said. "We did." The word "we" stayed with her. Around midday, they returned to the house. She washed her hands in a small bowl of water, watching the dirt swirl away. She had never worked like this before. Back home, life had been crowded and loud, but easier in some ways. Here, everything took effort. Every meal, every repair. Every day, they ate again. Simple food, quiet conversation. He asked about her journey. She told him about the train, the long nights, and the towns she passed through. He listened closely, not interrupting, like her words mattered. In the afternoon, he left to check on something farther out on the land. He told her she could rest if she wanted. She watched him walk away, his figure growing smaller against the wide sky. The house felt very quiet when he was gone. She walked around the room, touching the shelves, the table, the walls. None of it belonged to her yet, but she wondered if one day it might feel like it did. She sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the town he had mentioned before, about the people who might look at her and see only a stranger. Later, she stepped outside and walked a short distance from the house. The land felt open and honest. There were no secrets here, no walls to hide behind, just the sky and the earth and her own thoughts. When he returned, the sun was starting to sink again. He looked tired, but he still nodded at her, like he was glad to see her waiting. That evening, they cooked together. She cut vegetables while he worked at the stove. Their movements were careful, slow, like they were learning a quiet dance. At one point, their hands brushed, and both of them pulled back slightly, surprised. Then they looked at each other and gave small, awkward smiles. After dinner, they sat on the porch. The sky turned soft colors again, just like the night before. She hugged her knees, watching the land. "This place is different," she said. He nodded. "It is. Not everyone can live here. I don't know if I can yet," she admitted, "but I want to try." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "That's all I ask." The next few days passed in a steady pattern. Work in the morning, rest in the afternoon. Quiet evenings. Her body grew stronger, even as it ached. Her hands grew used to the tools. She learned where things were kept, how to move through the house without thinking. But not everything was easy. One day, they went into town to buy supplies. The town was small, with a few buildings and a dusty road. As they walked together, she felt eyes on her. People whispered, some stared openly. She held her head high, but inside, her heart beat fast. At the store, a woman behind the counter looked at her, and then at him. "So this is her?" the woman said. He didn't answer right away. He stepped a little closer to her. "Yes."
"This is my wife." The word felt heavy and strong at the same time.
She didn't know if she was ready for it, but she felt grateful he said it. On the way back to the ranch, she was quiet. He noticed. "They can be rude," he said.
"They don't know you. They don't want to," she replied softly. He thought about that for a moment.
Maybe not.
"But I do, and that matters here." That night, she lay in bed again, staring at the ceiling. Her body was tired, but her mind was awake. She thought about the town, the land, the work, and the man who shared this life with her. She still felt like a guest in her own home. Still felt like she was standing on the edge of something, not quite inside it. But she also felt something growing. Slowly, carefully. A sense that maybe, just maybe, this wide, quiet place could become more than just a stop in her life. The next morning began like the others, with light slipping through the window and the soft sounds of the ranch waking the day. She rose quietly, careful not to disturb him. Her body still felt tired from the work, but it was a different kind of tired now, one that came with a small sense of purpose. She stepped outside and breathed in the cool air. The land looked calm, almost peaceful, but inside her a storm of thoughts was growing. Since the visit to town, she could not forget the looks and whispers, the way people had spoken about her like she was not standing right there. It made her feel small, like she was only a story others told, not a person with her own heart. He joined her on the porch a few moments later, holding 2 cups of warm drink. He handed one to her without a word. She accepted it and wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth sink into her fingers. They stood in silence for a while. Finally, she spoke. "Do they always talk like that?" He did not answer right away. He stared out at the open land, his jaw tight.
Sometimes people don't understand things that are different.
"They make stories instead." She looked down at the cup. "I don't want to be a story. I just want to be real." He nodded slowly. "I know." They went back to work, but the air between them felt heavier than before. The easy rhythm they had started to build felt broken. They moved around each other carefully, like 2 people afraid of stepping on a weak bridge. Later in the day, he rode out to check on the far fence again. She stayed behind, cleaning and fixing small things around the house. As she swept the floor, she found one of his old letters tucked under a shelf. It was yellowed and folded many times. She hesitated, then opened it. The words were careful and simple. He had written about the land, the quiet nights, and his hope of finding someone to share his life. But what caught her attention was a line near the end. "I am not good with people. I say the wrong things. I stay quiet when I should speak. But I promise I will try." She sat down slowly, the broom slipping from her hand. She realized then that maybe he was struggling just as much as she was. He might not show it in words or actions, but he carried his own fears and doubts. That evening when he returned, she was waiting at the door. "I found one of your letters," she said. He froze for a moment, like he wasn't sure how to respond. "Oh, I didn't mean to read it," she added quickly. "But I did." He sighed and set down his coat. "What did it say?" "It said you would try," she replied. "Even if it was hard." He looked at the floor, then back at her. "I meant that." She took a step closer. "Then maybe we should both try, not just to live here, but to understand each other." For the first time that day he smiled, not small or careful, but real. They sat at the table that night and talked longer than they ever had before. She told him about her family, about the life she had left behind, about the dreams she once had that didn't come true. He listened, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes focused on her face. Then he spoke about his past, about growing up alone on the land, about losing people he cared about choosing this life because it felt safer than hoping for something that might leave. "I didn't think anyone would really come," he admitted. "When you stepped off that train, I was scared. Not because I didn't want you here, But because I did, her chest tightened at his words. Days passed and things felt lighter again. Not perfect, but better. They laughed sometimes. Small laughs, quiet ones, but real. One afternoon they rode together to the edge of the land where the hills rose gently. The sky was wide and blue, and the wind moved through the grass like waves. She stopped and looked around. "It's beautiful here." He nodded. "I forget that sometimes." They sat there for a while, just watching the land. But peace does not always last. A few days later, a group from town came to the ranch. They said they were just passing by, but their words carried sharp edges. They asked questions that didn't feel kind. They looked at her like she was something strange, not someone who belonged. One man laughed and said, "So, how long do you think she'll stay?" She felt her face grow hot. She looked at him, then at the ground. For a moment, he said nothing. She thought he might stay quiet like before. But then he stepped forward. "She'll stay as long as she wants," he said, his voice steady. "This is her home." The group went silent. After a few awkward moments, they left. She stood there, her heart racing. "Thank you," she said softly. He shrugged, but there was something proud in his eyes. "I should have done that sooner." That night, she couldn't sleep. The moment kept replaying in her mind. The way he had stood up for her, the way he had called this place her home. Still, doubts crept in. Was she really part of this land, or was she just borrowing space in someone else's life? The next day she decided to go into town alone. She needed to prove something to herself. When she arrived, people stared again, but this time she didn't lower her head. She walked into the store, spoke clearly, and bought what she needed. Some people still whispered, but others nodded at her. Small steps, but steps all the same. When she returned, he was waiting by the house. "I was worried," he said. "I needed to do it," she replied. "For me." He nodded, understanding. That evening they sat on the porch as the sun went down. The sky painted itself in soft colors, and the land grew quiet. "I don't want to run anymore," she said. "I ran my whole life. I want to stand somewhere and stay." He looked at her for a long moment.
You don't have to decide everything today. Just stay tomorrow.
Then the next day. "That's how I've always done it." She smiled. "That sounds simple." "Simple doesn't mean easy," he said. They both laughed quietly. As the stars appeared one by one, she felt something settle inside her. Not certainty, not a promise, but a choice. She chose to stay, to try, to build something slow and steady, even if it was hard. Inside the small house, a lamp glowed softly, casting warm light on the walls. Outside, the land stretched wide and open. Between those two spaces, two people stood, no longer strangers, but not yet fully at home either. They were somewhere in between. The days began to feel different after that night on the porch. Not easier, but warmer in a quiet way. The work was still hard, the land still demanded strength and patience, but now, when she woke up in the morning, she did not feel like she was stepping into someone else's life. She felt like she was stepping into her own. One morning she found him outside before the sun had fully risen. He was trying to fix a broken part of the fence, pulling at a heavy wooden post that would not move. She watched for a moment, then walked over. "Let me help," she said. He shook his head. "It's heavy, so am I," she replied with a small smile. He looked at her, surprised, then laughed quietly. Together they pushed and pulled until the post finally slid into place. They both stumbled back, out of breath and looked at their work. "There," she said. "We did it again." He wiped his forehead. "We did?" They stood there for a moment, catching their breath, sharing a tired but proud silence. Later that day, she decided to change something inside the house. The shelves were bare and plain, and the walls felt cold. She found a small piece of cloth in her suitcase, one she had carried from her old home. It was faded, but it still held color and memory. She placed it on the table. When he came inside, he stopped and looked at it. "What's that?" he asked. "It's from where I came from," she said. "I thought maybe it could belong here, too." He touched the edge of the cloth gently, like it was something fragile.
"I like it," he said. It was a small thing, but it made the house feel different.
Like it was no longer just a place to stay, but a place to live. As the weeks passed, she began to find her own rhythm. She learned how to bake bread in the small oven. It did not always turn out right, but when it did, the smell filled the house and made them both smile. She started to recognize the sounds of the animals, knowing which call meant hunger and which meant rest. He began to talk more, too, not just about work, but about little things. A memory from his childhood. A story about a horse he once had. A mistake he made years ago that still made him shake his head. One evening, as they sat at the table, he looked at her and said, "I never thought I'd share these things with anyone." "Why not?" she asked. He thought for a moment, because when you share something, you give someone the chance to leave with it. She nodded. "That's true. That's true. That's that. But if you don't share, you're alone with it forever." He smiled softly.
"You're good with words," she laughed. "I wasn't always."
"I learned because I had to." The town slowly began to change too. When they went to buy supplies, people still looked, but not with the same sharp eyes. A few nodded. One woman even asked her how she liked the land. "It's hard," she said honestly, "but it's mine now." The woman nodded like she understood. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. The sky grew dark, and the wind picked up speed. He rushed to secure the animals, and she followed, holding ropes and closing gates. Rain began to fall, cold and heavy. At one point, she slipped in the mud and fell to the ground.
He ran to her side. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice full of worry.
She shook her head, laughing a little despite the rain. "Just dirty." He helped her up, his hands steady and warm. For a brief moment they stood close, rain falling around them, the storm loud in their ears. "Thank you," she said. "Always," he replied. They ran back to the house together, soaked and breathless. Inside they stood near the stove, trying to dry their clothes. The room felt small in a comforting way. She looked at him and said, "I don't think I could have done this alone." He nodded. "I know I couldn't have." That night the storm passed, leaving the land fresh and clean. The air smelled new, like everything had been washed and given another chance. As the days turned into more weeks, something else began to grow between them. It wasn't loud or fast, it was quiet and slow, like the way the land changed with the seasons. They began to notice small things about each other. The way he always checked the door at night before sitting down. The way she hummed softly when she worked. The way they both looked at the sky before going inside, like they were saying goodbye to the day. One evening they took a walk across the field. The sun was low and the grass glowed in the soft light. "Do you ever miss your old life?" he asked. She thought about it. The crowded streets, the noise, the faces she used to see every day. "Sometimes," she said. "But I don't miss the feeling of not knowing who I was." He nodded. "I know that feeling." They stopped walking and stood there,
side by side.
I used to think this land was all I needed, he said, but now I think it's better with you here. Her heart beat faster at his words. She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled. Later that night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling like she had on her first night. But this time, the sounds of the house felt familiar. The wind outside felt like a friend, not a stranger. She thought about how far she had come, not just in distance, but in herself. The next morning, she surprised him with a small breakfast she had prepared on her own. It wasn't perfect, but it was made with care. He took a bite and smiled. "This is good," she laughed. "You're just being kind." "No," he said. "I'm being honest." They ate together, and she felt a deep sense of peace settle inside her. That afternoon, they worked on planting a small garden near the house. The soil was dark and rich, and she pressed the seeds into the ground carefully.
"What do you think will grow?"
she asked. He shrugged. "Hard to say. Sometimes things surprise you." She looked at the small patches of earth and thought about herself, about how she had come here as a stranger, unsure and afraid. "I think we will too," she said. He looked at her, curious. "Surprise each other?" "Yes," she replied, "and maybe surprise ourselves." As the sun set, they stood together, looking at the land they were slowly shaping, not just with fences and gardens, but with shared moments and quiet understanding. She realized then that home was not just a place, it was a feeling built, day by day, choice by choice. And she had chosen this place, this life, this man, not because it was easy, but because it was real. The future was still unknown. There would be more hard days, more doubts, more moments when the land and the world tested them. But now they would face those moments together, side by side, under the wide sky that had brought them both here. The morning light came in soft and gentle, like it was careful not to wake the land too quickly. She opened her eyes and listened. The familiar sounds of the ranch greeted her, a bird outside, the quiet movement of air through the grass, the low sound of an animal far away. These sounds no longer felt strange. They felt like part of her. She sat up and smiled without even thinking about it. When she stepped outside, he was already there, standing near the small garden they had planted together. Tiny green leaves were pushing through the dark soil. He noticed her and pointed. "Look," he said. She walked closer and knelt down. "They're growing," he nodded. "I told you things like to surprise you." She touched one of the small leaves carefully. "So do people," she said. They stood there for a moment, watching the morning stretch across the land. Life on the ranch continued in its steady rhythm. Some days were calm. Some were tiring, but each day felt full in a way she had never known before. She was no longer counting the hours or the weeks. She was living inside them. One afternoon, a traveler stopped by the ranch. He was looking for water and a place to rest. They welcomed him inside, gave him food, and listened to his stories of the road. He spoke of towns, rivers, and faraway places she had never seen. When he left, she stood on the porch and watched him walk away. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you didn't come here?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but then I look around, and I think this is where I was meant to be." She nodded. "Me too." The town changed even more as time passed. People began to greet her by name. The store owner asked how the garden was doing. A child once ran up to her and asked if she could see the animals at the ranch. She realized she was no longer just someone who had arrived. She was someone who belonged. One evening they were sitting at the table, eating in comfortable silence, when he spoke. "I've been thinking," he said. She looked up. "About what?" "About this place. About us." Her heart beat a little faster. "And," he took a breath, "I want to make it better. I want that cup, the house, the land. Not just for me, for both of us." She felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'd like that." The next weeks were filled with small projects. They fixed a broken step on the porch. They painted the door a lighter color. They added another shelf inside for her things. Each change, no matter how small, made the place feel more like a shared home. One day, they found an old frame in a box in the storage shed. It was cracked but still strong. She placed one of her drawings inside it. It wasn't a great drawing, just a simple picture of the land and the sky. He hung it on the wall. "There," he said. "Now the house knows you live here." She laughed, but her eyes grew a little wet. As the seasons began to change, the land showed new colors. The grass turned softer shades. The air grew cooler in the mornings. They worked together to prepare for colder days, stacking wood, checking the roof, making sure everything was ready. One night as they sat near the stove, she asked, "Do you ever feel afraid of the future?" He looked at the fire. "Sometimes, but I think being afraid means you care about what's coming." She nodded. "I care." "So do I," he said. They sat quietly, listening to the fire crackle. A few days later, they went into town together. There was a small gathering, nothing fancy, just people sharing food and music. She hesitated at the edge, unsure. He noticed.
"You don't have to go in if you don't want to." She took a deep breath. "I do." They walked in side by side.
People smiled. Someone offered her a seat. A woman asked about her journey. She told her story, not as someone who had been sent, but as someone who had chosen. On the way back to the ranch, she felt lighter. "I didn't feel like I was hiding," she said.
He smiled. "You weren't."
"You were standing." As the months passed, they grew into a quiet understanding. They didn't need to fill every moment with words. Sometimes, just working next to each other was enough. One evening, as the sun set in bright colors across the sky, he stopped and looked at her. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. She didn't hesitate. "I am too." She thought about the person she had been when she stepped off the train. Nervous, unsure, carrying fear in every step. Now, she felt strong, not because life was easy, but because she had learned how to face it. One night, a storm came again. They secured the house and sat inside, listening to the rain. The wind shook the walls, but the house stood firm. She looked at him. "It's loud out there." He nodded. "But it's safe in here." She realized he wasn't just talking about the storm. When the rain stopped, they opened the door and stepped outside. The sky was clear and the stars were bright. She tilted her head back. "It's beautiful." He stood next to her. "So is this life." They stood there for a long time, feeling small under the wide sky, but not alone. The next morning she went to the garden again. The plants had grown more. Some had small buds. She called out to him, "Come see." He joined her, and they knelt together. "We did this," she said. "Yes," he replied, "we did." She thought about how much those words had come to mean, not just about fences and gardens and houses, but about building a life. Later that day, she found the old suitcase she had brought with her. It sat in the corner, untouched, for weeks. She opened it and looked inside. There were a few clothes, some letters, and small things from her old life. She closed it and pushed it back into the corner. She didn't need it the way she once had. That evening they sat on the porch, watching the sky change colors. "I used to think my life was something that happened to me," she said. "Like I had no choice." He listened. "Now I know I do," she continued. "Every day I choose to be here with you." He looked at her, and for a moment he didn't speak. "Thank you," he finally said, "for choosing this, for choosing me." She smiled. "Thank you for making it worth choosing." The wind moved through the grass, soft and steady. As the sun disappeared and the stars came out, she felt a deep sense of calm settle inside her, not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. She had found a place where she could stand, grow, and belong, not because someone told her to, but because she chose it.